Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We'll just get started in just another minute or so here as we see people join. Thank you for joining today. All right, thanks everyone. We'll go get started. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. Today's session is titled Understanding Changes to SNAP, Navigating the New Food Assistance Landscape. And Cassie has done a great job putting together a nice presentation on primer on SNAP and SNAP benefits, and kind of unpack many of those big sweeping changes that have been included in the recent budget reconciliation bill, also known as OBBA. Before we begin, Cassie, we can put the slides on the screen there.
Are you, sorry, not seeing the slides?
There we go. I think I can see it now. You can go to the second slide there.
Sure.
So yeah, just before we get started, I just wanted to just do a brief disclaimer that just so we know that these resources are intended for kind of educational purposes only, and nothing on this webinar or any of the linked pages should be taken as legal advice. If you do need legal advice, legal aid is here to help, and you should consult a qualified public benefits attorney. I also just want to make a note that we will be recording this webinar, and both the recording and the slides will be made available to everyone who registered. And we will also be posting it to our YouTube page as well. So with that, I'll turn, actually one more slide. We'll do a housekeeping on how to ask questions. Go to the next slide, Cassie. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please use that Q&A tool on the bottom there. You'll see Q&A, the question box. Just click that and put in your question, and we will do our best to answer as many of those questions during the session. And if we miss any, we'll follow up with you individually as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Cassie Edner. Very pleased to have her joining us today to talk a lot about SNAP and how the changes will impact Virginians. Go ahead.
Thank you. So September is Hunger Action Month, and I'll explain a little bit what SNAP is, basic eligibility, and then some of the changes that we will be seeing soon. But first I want to point out some, statistics related to hunger in Virginia. According to the most recent Feeding America data that we have, over 1 million individuals are food insecure in Virginia, and roughly 12% of Virginia's population. Over 260,000 kids are food insecure. Over 10% of seniors are 10% of seniors are insecure, and roughly 9% of households receive SNAP. Most of those households that receive SNAP have a child in the home. 33,000 veterans receive SNAP in Virginia. Over 6,379 retailers participate in the SNAP program in Virginia, and SNAP brings about $1.76 billion a year to the state of Virginia. For every dollar that we use for SNAP, it brings $1.50 to the local economy when there's economic downturn. And every meal a food bank provides, SNAP provides 6. So SNAP is really important when you're talking about hunger and how to try to eliminate hunger. I have some data here from March 2025. There was a roughly 445,000 households participating in SNAP, over 860,000 individuals. The average household allotment for that month was 337, and the average SNAP benefit per person for that month was about $173. Um, Anyone who goes grocery shopping knows, um, $173 does not cover the full cost of groceries, um, unfortunately. So now I'm going to start to talk about the financial eligibility of SNAP. Um, it's complicated. SNAP is complicated. There are two ways to be eligible. I'm oversimplifying, but when you're talking about financial aspects, you have to meet a gross income in order to be eligible, meaning you have to have income below 200% of the federal poverty level. Individuals who are over 200% of the federal poverty level can only receive SNAP if they're 60 plus or disabled, and they also have to have net income below 100% and meet a resource test. So I think of this as like a very broad category. Most people have to fall in that 200%. Seniors and individuals with disabilities, if they are over that 200%, they may still be eligible for SNAP benefits, but they do have to meet that net income requirement and the resource requirement. There's no resource requirement for individuals under the 200%. And then there's a second piece of it when you're looking at the financial, and this oftentimes confuses people. They say, oh, I'm under the 200% of the federal poverty level. It says that I should be eligible for SNAP benefits. You also have to be eligible for an amount of SNAP benefits. So we look at your gross income for that 200%, and then we calculate the net income to determine how much your benefit amount will be. Households that are usually a size of 1 or 2, if they're below that 200%, they are all automatically eligible for the minimum benefit of $23. Households that have more than a household size of 2, so 3 plus members, what they do is they take your net income and they divide it and they multiply it by 0.3, and they subtract that amount from the maximum benefit amount. So individuals that may be under 200%, but their net income is higher, even though they are under that 200%, they wouldn't be eligible for a benefit amount, so they're not eligible for SNAP. So it's a little bit complicated there and a little bit confusing because of the way that you do the gross income and then you calculate the benefit amount. Another thing that's a little bit confusing for SNAP compared to other programs like Medicaid and SSI is the way that they do household members. A household is a person living together or alone who purchase and prepare meals together. There can be exceptions for seniors who are disabled and are unable to purchase and prepare food for themselves. But other than that, if they are purchasing and preparing food, they are a household for SNAP. There are also some required household members. Your spouse is a member of your household. Children under age 18 who are under your parental control of an adult household member other than their parent. Those are all individuals in households. Children 21 years of age or younger who live with their parent, unless the parental rights have been terminated, are also a household. So this is one of those things that, we see oftentimes confuses individuals. They may live with their 21-year-old child. Their child has their own job. They don't eat and prepare foods together. They are completely separated as an economic, household. But their child is still included in their SNAP benefits. What is income? SNAP counts cash income from all sources, including unearned income. One thing to really, take a look at is the payroll before any taxes or deducted. Unearned income, such as Social Security, unemployment, child support, child support received. Um, Oftentimes we have people say, oh, my income is X amount. I'm confused why I'm not eligible. For most public benefits, there's a multiplier. Just throwing this out there when calculating income. So, if you get paid 4 times a week, you have to look at your average and multiply it by 4.3, because some weeks you get paid 5. And this is something that often confuses individuals. What doesn't count as income? Earnings of minor children don't count as income. Lump sum payments, self-employment expenses, loans, reimbursements, these things do not count as income. I would like to highlight earnings of minor children do not count, but unearned income of minor children does count, which is different um, from other public benefit roles. So if you have a child that has SSI, that income is included in your household. And once the child becomes an adult, once they hit that 18th birthday, that income is then included in your income when calculating your benefit amount. That's another thing that a lot of people don't understand, is how come, once my child does turn 18, I'm not going to ask them to, give me money from their part-time job to, help pay for food. But unfortunately, SNAP does include that income. And then when you're looking at net deductions or net income, there are deductions that you could take. There's the standard deduction or an income deduction, dependent care, shelter, medical expenses, and homeless shelter. And I'm going to go and discuss these more in depth later when we talk about the changes. But I'd like to highlight here, gas that you pay to go to and from your to the grocery store, that's not included. um you know the tax that you pay on your car isn't included. There are very limited number of deductions that you can actually take to get your net income down. And again, I will discuss those in further detail later. So one of the major changes under the new law is work reporting requirements. Now, work reporting requirements are not a new thing for SNAP. Back in 1996, the federal government required all able-bodied adults without dependents. I'm going to call them ABOD. That's what I'm going to refer to them from here on out. ABOD, able-bodied adults without dependents, who are not able to show that they are working more than 20 hours a week or participating in a work program to receive SNAP benefits. Can only receive SNAP benefits for 3 months out of a 36-month period. During COVID, these requirements were suspended. In 2023, the Fiscal Responsibility Act extended the work reporting requirement age limits from 49 to 54 incrementally. It also created some exceptions for individuals aging out of foster care, veterans, and homeless individuals. Under this new bill, it increased the work reporting age requirement to 64, effective immediately. It also expanded to families with minors 14 and older, and it took away those exemptions for children aging out, foster care, veterans, and homeless individuals. It also made it harder for states to waive the work reporting requirements, except for areas of very high unemployment, at or over 10%. So the exceptions before the bill Under 18 or 55 years or older, mentally or physically unfit for employment, parent or individual residing in a household where a member is under the age of 18, pregnant individuals, homeless, veterans, individuals 24 or younger who were in foster care at the date that they attained 18, or if they meet an exemption for the work requirements. That's very confusing because you're probably like, what are the work requirements? Isn't that what we're talking about? But there's multiple work requirements in SNAP. And I will explain the difference between the ABOD work requirements and then the work registration requirements in a later slide. After the bill, like I said, increased that age to 65. Now individuals are exempt if they're 65. It still has, pregnant or mentally or physically unfit for employment. It added a new one of certain Native Americans, and it also has it remaining meet the exemption for the work registration requirements. It's still as we discussed, they also made it so individuals with households 14 and over have to now meet the ABOD requirements. It's no longer under 18. So as I said, as I promised, there's a difference between ABOD and work registration. Work registration is individuals who are physically or mentally fit to work, are over the age of 15 and under 60, must register to work or voluntarily, and cannot voluntarily quit or reduce their hours. Individuals who are not exempt from the work registration requirement and they don't register or they do voluntarily quit without good cause, there are violations for non-compliance based off of how often they did this. Individuals under here are exempt are parents who care for a dependent under 6 or an incapacitated person, bona fide students enrolled at least in half-time in a recognized school, training program, or institution of higher education, participation in drug and alcohol rehab programs, individuals employed 30 hours a week or make more than 30 hours times the minimum or the federal minimum wage, and that's about $217.50 an hour, in persons 16 and 18 who are not head of household. What I would like to point out here is the bona fide student. That's an important one, but I'm not going to go in depth because there's enough to cover here, but it's very hard to receive SNAP benefits when you are a college student. But if you can receive it, if you meet those exceptions, you can meet the exemption for this as well. Another one that I think is very important is individuals employed or making more than $217.50 a week. And why is that important? Because the ABOD requirements are 20 hours a week. However, we do have a higher minimum wage in Virginia than the $7.25, and some employers offer more than even the state minimum wage. So it is possible that people are not hitting that 20 hours a week, but they're hitting that $217.50 a week. So it's really important that people are screened for that exemption. Again, I'm not going to go in depth, but getting SNAP benefits as a college student is very difficult. Into all of those other requirements that I just talked about income, there's immigration requirements that we'll talk about. But you also have to meet very stringent requirements in order to be able to get SNAP as a college student. It is difficult and it is very complex. One of the other changes that they made was to waivers in states, the waivers that states could have. Prior to this bill, the unemployment rate either had to be 10% or higher, or an individual has to, the area has to have, does not have sufficient number of jobs to employ individuals. Virginia had waivers based off of the second criteria. Among ways to show that there's not sufficient amount of jobs, you have to show more than 20% above the national unemployment rate. And the following counties had between 4.8 and 5.7% on average unemployment. That was above the 20% unemployment rate. Our waiver ended on June 30th and cannot be extended under this bill. So these localities are losing exemptions, and for the first time in about 15 years, they are going to now have to complete the work reporting requirement, the ABOD requirements. So we're looking at Brunswick, Buchanan, Danville, Dickinson, Dinwiddie, Greensville and Emporia, Hopewell, Martinsville, Petersburg, Surrey, and Sussex. The local departments of social services are already very overburdened. These changes are going to make things even more difficult, as we discussed. At the local level. And it's really important, the first time in 15 plus years that these localities are doing it, just to make sure individuals aren't improperly losing SNAP benefits, particularly in these counties, because it is that first time. Now, there's certain ways to meet the work reporting requirements. You can work for cash wages or in-kind goods or services for 20 hours or more a week. You can participate and comply with employment services programs offered by DSS or other non-departmental work programs. You can serve as unpaid or volunteer at minimum for a number of hours equal to the household allotment divided by the federal minimum wage, or you can do a combination of these. I would like to put here that there is a good cause exception. If you are unable to work, as long as you show that the absence is temporary and that you retain the job that you had. So if you have surgery and you can't work, if you are retaining that job and the apps, you plan on being back soon, that should not count against you. Another thing that I realized that I didn't mention previously for the mentally or physically unfit to work, there's not one type of verification that you should have to provide, but we often have been told by DSSs to have the doctor fill out a form. And then based off of that form, they usually determine whether or not the person can meet those work requirements. And we can send out that form when we send the emails, just so you have it in case you know of anyone that needs that form, because it can be difficult figuring out, how to get some of these exemptions. So that's just something to think about when you're working with a population that might not have Social Security disability benefits, and who might need to have that form filled out. And then obviously, I guess it's not obvious, I apologize. Individuals that are receiving Social Security disability benefits are exempt from the ABOD work requirements. The caveat here is that individuals that receive Social Security early retirement benefits, unfortunately, are not exempt off of that alone. We and I apologize to stop. Deepak, are you just seeing my screens, or can you see?
Yeah, no, the team investors are coming. I'll message Claudia. Keep going.
Sorry, I thought I turned off Teams and um, it might have restarted. I apologize. Um, yeah, so Social Security disability benefits, early retirement aren't included. We hear a lot of times that individuals, who want to apply for Social Security disability benefits, may be persuaded, or I don't want to say persuaded, but once they're 62, a lot of times, they're told, oh, well, you don't qualify for Social Security disability benefits. You should get early retirement instead. And that does not count. And also just a tip there, individuals, once they are older, if they are getting that advice, they might want to just speak to a disability attorney, Social Security disability attorney, in order to see if they could qualify for Social Security disability benefits, because there are benefits there as well to get Social Security disability instead of early retirement. So the screening and time limits. The state is required to provide written and oral explanation of all the work requirements at the time of certification and recertification. And anytime someone becomes an exempt individual or new household is subject to the work requirements. So what that means practically and what that means now is, with the ABOD, they should not be terminating everyone on X date that is between the ages of 55 and 64. They actually have to screen them. This should take place during recertification, where they do that screening. So, if this isn't something that is done all at once. It's done, with new applications, and then it's done with the recertifications, is when they do the screening. The 3-month period doesn't include prorated benefits. So what that means is if you apply for SNAP benefits in October, but you only apply October 15th, your SNAP benefits are going to be prorated, and your ABOD 3-month wouldn't begin in October. It would begin in November when you're receiving that full month. The 3-month time limit begins and continues once there is a household between that age requirement of ABOD, even if an exemption exists for that member. So what that means practically is it's not a certain date. There's different ways that states can count that on a rolling basis, and it's dependent on, in Virginia, when the person met that age requirement, and it's going to be different for each person to determine when that 3 months started. If an individual participated in SNAP in another state, the agency has to verify the number of countable months the individual used in that month. So just coming to Virginia or going to another state doesn't wipe out your ABOD limits. Again, they cannot count countable months until it completes the screening. So individuals between the ages of 55 and 64, they can't have their clock for the ABOD count until until they are actually screened. Individuals that are screened and have that count clock started, um, they can get an overpayment if they receive SNAP benefits for that 4th month. However, individuals who lose exemptions during the certification period but weren't required to report the change, um, their ABOD would be calculated retrospectively, but there should not be an overpayment assessed to that individual. There shouldn't be no claim to overpayment assessed from that individual, as long as they were not required to report the change. And we'll talk in additional slides about the reporting requirement, because I think that's really important when you're talking about the error rates. Is what the actual reporting requirements are. Um, Once an household member meets the 3-month ABOD time limit, the agency still must send a notice to the member, and must include actions the individual must take to regain eligibility. There's still the 10-day time frame that's required in the notice of action. Individuals can regain eligibility by becoming exempt, or by working 80 hours or more during a 30-day period, or complying with a work program for 80 hours or more. If they lose eligibility, they can receive another 3-month eligibility period, but it must be used consecutively, and it cannot be saved. So let's say you had someone who applied, they weren't working, they get SNAP benefits for 3 months, they lose eligibility. They start working, at a job around the holidays when, there's an excess need for individuals to work. And they work 80 hours or more during a 30-day period. They apply again, they're approved. Their job is terminated, or their hours are reduced under the 20 hours a week. And they can get another 3-month period. Now there's not another one after that. If they then again work for, 30, 80 hours a week, for the next year and then lose a job after that, that they can't get that 3 months again until that clock restarts. And again, the clock started at the time when they reach that age, and that's how it's calculated. One of the other significant changes under this bill was changes to immigration requirements. Lawfully permanent prior to these changes, you had to be a qualified immigrant in order to get benefits. Refugee, asylee, certain individuals with deportation being held, parolee, conditional entrants, battered non-citizens, trafficking victims, could all get SNAP benefits. Under these changes, they only allow now lawfully permanent residents, COFA immigrants, and Cuban and Haitian entrants to get SNAP benefits. There has been no guidance as of 2 hours ago when I checked on how the state should implement this. No guidance from the federal government. They said that they would provide guidance by today on all the changes, but we haven't received. There has been no updated guidance on the website regarding this. I would like to just point out the asterisk there. For lawfully permanent residents, those individuals need to have either 5 years residence as a qualified immigrant, 40 qualifying work quarters, children under 18 can get it without meeting the 40 quarters or the 5 years, military connections. So there is an additional requirement for permanent residence. Now, the way that national advocates are reading these changes is the law did not change the definition of qualified immigrant, or what immigrants that 5-year bar. It did not change anything in that code section. It changed things in the code section related to who is eligible. So again, the LPRs, the COFAs, the Cuban Haitian entrants. Under the code that discusses the 5-year bar, it has exceptions for asylees and refugees to the 5-year bar. So again, we don't have guidance yet, but it's our understanding that once an asylee or a refugee does become an LPR, that they should be exempt under our reading. And again, we are waiting on guidance from the federal government. But this is going to harm a lot of families because, you know, asylees and refugees in Virginia who depend on SNAP benefits to help feed them. For Medicaid, for Medicaid, there's something called lawfully present for children and pregnant women, and that means that children that are lawfully present can get Medicaid, even if they don't meet these more strict requirements for immigration status. That is not the case for SNAP. There is no exception for children that are lawfully present for SNAP. So that means, you know, in addition to the parents that are, you know, asylees and refugees, the children that are asylees and refugees will also be losing their SNAP benefits once these changes begin. Now, you can still get benefits for your eligible household members, both for you know, individuals that have mixed immigrant household members. So, you know, say there's a citizen child, an asylee parent, and the parent loses eligibility. Or let's say that, you know, a parent has a child of 14, but they don't meet the ABOD requirements, that, you know, child, the 14-year-old, can still apply and get benefits. However, determining eligibility is a little bit more complicated in those situations. What is done is that they prorate the income. So non-eligible members must have their income prorated by the number of people in their household, and the amount for the actual eligible individuals are counted. Deductions are also prorated. However, eligible members must have all of their income and deductions included. There's no proration for eligible individuals. So this gets very mathematical when you are dealing with this. And I know I'm providing a lot of information. It is always my goal when providing information, not for everyone to remember everything that I said, but just to remember, I think someone discussed this at some point in time. Let me remember to look into it. So again, there's a lot of information here, I understand. So I have, you know, a hypo where mom is an asylee, dad is a citizen. One child is an asylee, one child is a citizen. Dad works, earns $3,000. Mom earns $1,500 a month. You include the full $3,000 of the dad's income because the dad is a citizen, but you prorate the mom's income. So for her, you would take the $1,500 and divide it by 4, the number of household members, and you multiply it by the number of eligible household members too. So you would get $750 in countable income. When you add that to the $3,000, you get a total countable income of $3,750, but you only compare it to a household size of 2. So it's very mathematical here. It often depends on the numbers, whether the person would still be eligible, what their benefit would look like prior to these changes. Um, there's a lot of math involved. And, we do have a SNAP calculator. Um, and if you want to put, it does not do the prorating, unfortunately. You have to do the prorating on your own. But if you're ever interested in trying to see, what different numbers look like, um, you know, how to calculate benefits, I'm more than happy to help if you reach out. But also we have the SNAP calculator, and if you put the information in it, you can actually expand the bottom of the SNAP calculator, and it tells you exactly how it calculated the steps. I would like to point out that the fiscal year for SNAP is October 1st. And it is September 30th right now. So if you use the SNAP calculator, it's going to give you information for September. October 1st is when there's a bunch of increases to income limits. So those numbers could change between today and tomorrow. So estimated number of individuals affected. Estimated 14,000 immigrants are at risk of losing their SNAP benefits. I don't have the number of children, U.S. citizen children that are in these households. But for individuals 55 to 64 without kids and disabilities, 22,000 individuals are at risk if they don't meet that requirement. And it includes 28,000 individuals in the household. There was some confusion the way that it was worded. That 28,000 includes the 22,000 at the top. And then for individuals 18 to 64 with kids with kids 14 plus and no disabilities, you're looking at 25,000 individuals and 50,000 members in the household. Again, that 25,000 does include the 50,000. Some other cuts we will briefly go over. There was a simplification process that allowed individuals that receive LIHEAP to automatically get the standard utility allowance. That has been taken away, except for individuals that are seniors or disabled. I have seniors or elderly, seniors and disabled, I apologize. There was supposed to be an internet deduction that would go into effect tomorrow, which allows the utility standard to include the internet. And unfortunately, that was blocked. Not having that internet when people are working and going to school, internet is needed now. You need it for everything. So it was a huge upset that's being blocked because it is a utility that everyone does need, or not everyone, but a lot of people in order to work and go to school. The internet is very helpful with that, especially the work requirements. You either have to pay gas or have internet to get to work or to volunteer. Thrifty food plan, it still allows it for adjustments for inflation, but it doesn't allow it to consider changes in the changing cost of healthy diets. So we had a recent update to the thrifty food plan. Prior, they updated, what foods are, considered healthy and what's a healthy diet, and kind of looking at what it actually costs versus what it was, just back in 1975. So we're going to see roughly a $35 billion cut over the next decade. And by cut, it means that it won't be expanding. So those expansions under the Thrifty Food Plan won't be happening under this plan except for inflation. Thrifty Food Plan is tied to emergency food assistance programs, a nutrition assistance program, block grant. So Puerto Rico doesn't have what we call the same SNAP that we have. They have a block grant for SNAP. It's tied to that, and then it's tied to summer EBT or summer meals that kids get during the summer. SNAP education was completely eliminated. SNAP education provided education on how to shop and cook healthy meals and lead physically active lifestyles. It's a really important program, but because of time and everything else I have to get through, I will put this here. But Virginia Tech Cooperative Extension Services did a really great job with running the program. Another huge change was state cost. Prior to this, well, even now, SNAP is administered 50-50 with the state and the federal government for the administration piece. However, beginning October 1st of 2026, the federal government is reducing its share to 25%. And increasing ours to 75%. And we could see an extra 86 million more a year in administrative costs. When you consider all these other, requirements that increase ABOD, I'll talk a little bit about Medicaid, and I'm not going to go too deeply into Medicaid. But when you're talking about all these other costs, the administration of these programs are going to be harder, and our costs are going to increase. Not just our share, but the actual costs of the program. Even in time with, just how life goes with inflation and things like that, the costs will increase. Now, for the first time ever, the cost of benefits are going to be paid by the state a percentage based off of our error rate. Error rates between 6% and 8%. So if it's less than 8, but more than 6, states have to pay 5%. Error rates 8 to 10%, less than 10%, states must pay 10%, and error rates 10% and above, states must pay 15%. The error rate is based off of the 2025 or 2026 error rates, and error rates are published the year after, in June, after the fiscal year. So the first one that we could be looking at is from October 1st, 2024 to September 30th, 2025. Or they could be they have the option of looking at October 1st, 2025. I have a typo in there. It's supposed to be September 30th, 2026. I will fix that typo. The state share begins on October 1st of 2027. So, we don't have to pay this immediately, but we do have to think about how we are going to be paying for this. There is an exception if our error rate is at or above 13.33%, either for the fiscal year 2025 or 2026, that payment could be pushed back to October 1st, 2028 or October 1st, 2029, depending on when our error hit above the 13.33. Error rates include underpayments and overpayments. It does not include denials, terminations, though. The federal government did care about error rates. This isn't, them saying, oh, this is the first time we cared about error rates. No, they've always cared. There were penalties for high error rates. However, the amount of that the state has to pay now, because it's based off of a share, is significantly more and more harmful. There have been some changes to how error rates were calculated. States have to do this in-depth quality control of cases where they take a sample of cases and they have to go back and look at the cases. They look first, at what's actually in the file, and then they have to, possibly contact the household members if the file looks correct to make sure that the household received the correct amount of benefits. Prior to fiscal year 2022, if a recertification form wasn't in the file, or if the recertification form didn't have a signature, quality control was supposed to contact the household and figure out, okay, were they actually eligible for SNAP benefits? Unfortunately, under the new guidance, they are automatically treated as not being eligible just because the file is missing that recertification form. Virginia's current error rate is at 11.5%. We would be paying roughly $264 million if that error rate doesn't go down or up. 175 million if we get it between that 8 and the 10, and 88 million if we can get it down to 6 to 8%. There's no state share if it goes below 6%. You know, the Department of Social Services, the local departments of social services have been very busy. There has been a lot of work on them recently with Medicaid unwinding, the changes to the SNAP because of the end of COVID, the ending of the emergency allotments, ended eligibility for college students, expanded eligibility for college students, the reinstatement of ABOD and the increased age limits, and then the newer problem of skimming, where people have their SNAP benefits stolen. It's a lot of work on caseworkers who are, a lot of times, doing both SNAP and Medicaid cases. What do we know about the error rates? I don't have the most up-to-date information, but I know for fiscal year 2022, there was a report that when our error rate was about 9.34, most 59% of the errors during that time were agency errors. Another 40% were client errors. Usually it's unintentional. The majority are unintentional client errors or unintentional agency errors. Of course, an agency wouldn't be doing it. We're not talking about fraud here. We're talking about the program is complicated and it increases the error rates when you have a program that's complicated to understand. And most of the error rates come from that income or deduction of expenses. As a result, what we're seeing is we're going to start seeing increased verifications. As I said briefly, there's shelter expense. You can take rent, property insurance, personal property taxes, repair costs due to disasters, utility bills. Before, if it was reasonable how much you said you were paying, you didn't have to verify that. Now you're going to have to verify every single one of these. I will say that there is a standard utility allowance if you have heating or cooling, and these numbers are going to change tomorrow. But it's really important to get that rent, to get all of the verifications in, but especially, the electricity one, if you can, for that heating, the standard utility allowance. And it's important to get all of them, but if you're having issues getting your water or your sewage bill, make sure that you prioritize especially the high cost ones, the rent, mortgage, and electricity, or if you pay a lot for gas, the gas. There's also dependent care expenses. Again, if it was reasonable, they used to accept that. Now you're going to have to verify that. There's medical expenses. You always had to verify medical expenses. I'm just putting it out here. Medical expenses are only for seniors or people with disabilities. Just to highlight, if a senior individual with a disability has more than $35 in medical expenses, they get a $200 standard deduction. So it's really important to look at all of those expenses to see if the senior can get the $200 deduction. In the future, they're also going to do household verifications. Not going to go into all of this verifications, but just some tips. Can't require one specific form of verification. Written documents are preferred, but collateral contexts are also allowed. If you or someone you know has a disability, they can, request a reasonable accommodation. If they have transportation issues or need interpretation services, they can request those. And the agency must help to obtain documents that the household cannot. I usually recommend, if my client can't provide the documents, for my client to send a written request, explaining the caseworker steps that you took to obtain the documents, um, and asking for their help, and maybe putting out a collateral source. So if you can't get your employer to send your wages, you could ask for the caseworker to call the employer and do it that way. With increased attention on the error rate, we also might have increased attention on actual SNAP cases. So they might be looked at more with a fine tooth comb. I just want to throw out simplified reporting. We've seen a few cases where they had an overpayment assessed, even though they weren't required to report the change in circumstances. So for households that have certification periods of 5 months or longer, you only have to report certain changes, income changes above the gross income threshold, lottery gambling winnings of 4,500, changes in the number of hours worked. You're going to get a notice. Review that notice for what you have to report, and it's going to tell you what you have to report, what the income, what income above a certain threshold you have to report. So you want to look at that. And if an error rate, this won't count as an error. If you don't have to report it and you don't report it, there is no overpayment if you didn't report it. Now you still have to, report everything on the interim report and the recertification, all changes there. But if you had a change, you're not required to report all the changes if you have that certification of more than 5 or more months. But again, read your notice. This is not legal advice. Read your notice and it will tell you for your household circumstances what you have to report. Now, if you report it, the agency does have to act on it. And if they don't, that would be an error. I'm not going to go through claims too much, but if you are assessed an overpayment or someone's assessed an overpayment, they can request a hearing to contest it. Individuals must repay the state. It will be taken from tax returns, Social Security benefits, unemployment benefits. They normally do get their money if there's an overpayment. If you still have SNAP, you can provide $10 or 10% of your SNAP benefits for the overpayment, whichever is more. If you're not receiving SNAP, you can do a repayment plan. And if you can't afford a repayment plan, you can do an offer and compromise where they look at your income and they see how much you can afford for a 36-month period. Again, there are Medicaid changes as well. That's going to make everything more difficult. All of these cuts kind of interplay into the whole weave of everything that supports families. Cuts to SNAP and Medicaid could affect school meals because there's direct certification there. Cuts to Medicaid can affect grocery stores, especially in high SNAP usages. And now I will stop sharing and ask for questions.
Thank you so much, Cassie. Great presentation. I did put a note in the thing that we may run over just a little bit today, but we are recording today's full presentation and we'll be sharing that with the full stack of slides. So you'll be getting that. And so for questions, one question we got in was about previously eligible vets and whether they're covered under a different program now. Or other.
I don't know of any other program that vets would qualify. I'm not aware, but that's not saying it's not out there. And vets may still qualify. It's very important just to make sure those exemptions are determined, especially if they have any medical issues, to get that paperwork signed for the medical paperwork.
Thank you, Cassie. Another one from an attendee asking, if a mixed status family loses benefits for their asylee members, what kind of happens to the case? Like, does the social services close the entire case, and will the family member who is eligible have to reapply?
That should not happen. They should evaluate the remaining family members' eligibility.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions today? Well, thank you everyone for joining today. And if you have any questions, additional specific questions about maybe clients you're working with or community members, feel free to reach out, particularly to your local legal aids. Many of them do help with SNAP applications and local DSS offices. I also want to put a plug in there. The Virginia Poverty Law Center also does a SNAP helpline and a SNAP calculator. I did share that link earlier. I'll share that again in the chat. If you find that, that'll give you access to both the SNAP calculator and the phone number for the SNAP helpline. But thank you so much, Cassie. Great presentation, and I hope everyone learned a lot today. And just a reminder, we will be sending out the full recording and the slides. Thank you.
Thank you.